Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Moscow Board of Adjustments meeting to order. It is Thursday, April 10th. I guess the first order of business would be to welcome our new and latest board member, Mr. Marshall Comstock. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. With that, let's move to the minutes from February 5th. Anybody have any corrections or clarifications they'd like to make?
I'm satisfied with these minutes the way they've been presented to us.
I didn't see any either. Do I have a? Sounds like I have a motion. Do I have a
All right.
second?
Well, I'll move then. If that goes with everyone, I'll move that we accept these minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. Actually, we'll start at that end.
Aye.
Aye. I wasn't
Abstain?
I'll abstain.
Aye.
And I'll abstain.
So we have 3 ayes and 2 abstentions. So the minutes have been approved. Let's move on to the fun part of the night.
Okay, good evening. Before you tonight is an amendment to a conditional use permit for a school at 1723 East F Street. I'd like to begin, just give you some background information. There was a conditional use permit that was obtained in February of 2000 to operate the Moscow Charter School and the Turning Point School at 1733 East F Street. The combined student enrollment at the time that the application was approved was 130 with a faculty count of 14. There was an amendment that was approved to that CUP in 2001 that included a rearrangement of the parking lot and reorientation of the building. And the approved site provided 35 parking spaces with loading and turnaround areas. The Turning Point School was relocated in 2005 to a different location in Moscow, and at that time, Moscow Charter School expanded into the space occupied by Turning Point, and the total enrollment and faculty numbers did not increase beyond the numbers that were approved with the former CUP. The property is located here on the south side of F Street, outlined in red. And just taking a closer look at the property, the small rectangle is the subject property that's under review tonight. The larger parcel to the west and the south is the current location of Moscow Charter School. The applicant is proposing to locate a 28 by 64 foot modular unit on a parcel adjacent to the existing school. The unit will provide 2 additional classroom spaces and allow for expansion of the school by 1 grade level to include the 8th grade. They will install paved accessible pathways connecting the modular entrance to the public sidewalk along F Street and to the existing pathways on the school property. The modular unit will include an ADA accessible entrance and 2 accessible restrooms, and the unit will be in operation on school days from 7:30 to 3:30 p.m. Each classroom will hold up to about 22 students plus a few staff members. The current year student enrollment is 141, and the current year faculty and staff is at 10. With the proposed expansion to include the 8th grade for next fall, they're estimating a student enrollment of 155 and an increase of just 1 staff member to be a total of 11. Here's a proposed site plan that you can't see too well, but this includes the whole site of the current Moscow Charter School and then the parcel where the modular unit is proposed to be located. So looking at that a little bit closer, the modular unit is going to be located here. The unit will meet all building setbacks. The pathways that will be installed are located here. As you can see, they'll connect to the existing paths and out to the public sidewalk on F Street. And a requirement, since this is a non-residential use, a type A landscape buffer will be installed on the east side of the property since it is adjacent to a residential parcel. The subject property is located within the medium-density R3 residential zone, where schools are permitted via a conditional use permit. A school is defined within the zoning code as an institution of learning which offers instruction in several branches of learning and study required to be taught in the public schools by the Idaho State Board of Education, including elementary, junior, or senior high, including public, private, and parochial, and also including preschool and kindergarten. All adjacent properties to the east, west, and south are also within the R3 zone. To the east, it's an undeveloped parcel, and then, as I've mentioned, to the west and the south is the current Moscow Charter School. Across F Street, the parcel is zoned farm, ranch, and outdoor recreation and consists of the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center and the Aquatic Center. The subject property is approximately a quarter of an acre, located on the south side of F Street. There are no structures currently on the lot. The mobile home that was previously there has been removed. The off-street parking for the use is located on the current site of the Moscow Charter School, where parking for 35 vehicles is provided. The off-street parking requirements for kindergarten, elementary, and junior high schools is 1 stall per employee or faculty member. So the 35 spaces that are provided does meet and exceed the requirement for the school. The subject property fronts F Street, which is a 30-foot wide collector street with curb edge and sidewalks on both sides. The property may be accessed by pedestrian and bicycles from the public sidewalk along F Street. And there is an existing curb cut on the subject property that will remain. However, there will be no vehicle use or access to the site from F Street. Here's some photos of the lot from standing on F Street. Relating this application to the comprehensive plan, Chapter 2, Land Use and Community Character, designates the subject property as parks, recreation, and open space. Parks, recreation, and open space includes the city's developed and undeveloped parks and pathways and public and semi-public open spaces on university grounds and designated open areas within private developments. Chapter 6, Economic Development, outlines a goal to enhance and strengthen the regional economy, utilizing the strengths and assets of the region. And an objective of Chapter 6 is to expand and enhance the promotion of education, arts, and culture. The staff's recommendation tonight is to conduct a public hearing, consider all testimony presented, and approve the application to amend the existing CUP for the Moscow Charter School. And I'm available for questions.
Evan?
Do you have information that the owner's aware of this as well as?
I do. That was included in the packet. There was an email.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me if you got a response to that suggested that.
Right. I'm sorry. The email was from the principal of the school, stating that he was representing the owner. So no, there was no contact with the owner.
Okay. Thanks.
Rebecca, I had a question. When I was reviewing this, it was highlighting the portion, the right or the northeast portion of the whole overall lot. Is this CUP for that specific area?
Yes.
So how are they able to utilize, in terms of parking, the off-site parking that's in what would be the adjacent space, which is the rest of the charter school, if they're not being treated as one unit?
The two lots are under common ownership.
Okay.
So when that's the case, they're treated essentially as one lot.
Any other? Yes, sir. Sure.
So then, following up, if the parcels were ever sold to another owner, then this CUP would terminate.
I'm not sure.
Well, that's how we define a single building lot within the code, would be as long as it's developed under common ownership, then we would look at the entire lot, not just two parcels. It would essentially be that entire lot would be the development.
Right. So then the CUP is only valid as long as the two parcels are owned by a single owner. And then if it were ever sold to a separate owner, the CUP would no longer be valid. Is that?
Well, usually ownership isn't tied to a CUP. It's generally the use.
I recognize that, but we're having it where a point we are potentially approving a CUP based on common ownership, which means that the CUP cannot be granted if there weren't common ownership.
Well, it's currently under common ownership. We've checked that with Latah County Assessor. And so generally what we do in these circumstances would do some type of lot tie agreement, which would be established between the city and the owner of the property, which would tie those two parcels together in perpetuity.
Okay. So in other words, if it were ever sold separately, then there would be no longer a CUP on the, there would be no conditional use permit authorized for the separate smaller lot that Joe noted.
Correct.
Okay. So I have a few more questions. Do you know how long the school has been in violation of its current conditional use permit, given that it is currently 11 students over the limitation placed in the conditional use permit?
I do not know the exact date that was. I'm imagining over the last, since 2005 was the revision that those numbers grew by 11.
But the conditional use permit does in fact limit the school to 130 students.
That wasn't a condition on the previous CUP, but it was presented at the time of that application that student enrollment was at 130. But it wasn't applied as a condition that the enrollment remain at that number.
Okay. So there's no, the conditional use permit has no cap at all on the number of students? The current one does?
There was no condition on the conditional use permit.
I think that if that were stated in the application, that would be inherent in the CUP, but that's a different question. Second, the application contains what appears to be a legal conclusion that the after-school clubs are not classified as childcare. I think legally that statement's true, but why is it not classified as a daycare?
Why is what not classified
The
as
after-school clubs, things that are not part of the school programs where they're providing care for children under the age of 13 away from their home. That would be a daycare. I assume there's not a permit for the daycare. Is there a reason that's not a daycare?
I'd have to look at the definition of daycare. I don't know.
The definition of daycare is providing care for
child
children
care.
under the age of 13 that are not your own and away from their home for compensation. No, not right now. Well, I'll ask you the same question, but Mike, do you know anything?
The applicant may be able to answer that
Okay.
question.
Actually, you may have answered it yourself.
I know,
Because there's no
I know.
compensation.
I know, but we'll have to ask the applicant that. Okay, thanks, Peggy. That's all I had.
Okay.
Any other questions for Rebecca? Okay. Well, with that, I open this up for the public hearing. If the applicant would like to come up and present your project and items to us, please state your name and address into the record for us, too.
My name's Tony Bonicelli. I'm the principal of the Moscow Charter School at 1723 East F Street. The reason that we are expanding to 8th grade, and we need the extra classroom space. So last year, the school purchased the land that is currently for CUP, and to add this expansion on once we decided to expand to 8th grade. This year we looked at it, and it looked like the best option would be to bring in this portable space and create an area for our middle school. By doing this, that would create another teaching position and also allow us to expand and show off teach our STEAM curriculum to other children in the city of Moscow. Other questions?
I've got two, and one of them is actually that you could probably respond to Jerry's comment.
Yeah, sorry for speaking up out there.
That's
I'm
right.
new to this.
I noticed that we're adding 2 classrooms, but only 1 faculty person. So I was confused what the other classroom is being used
Right.
for, because clearly there's enough parking to add 2 faculty, so that's irrelevant.
So what we have now is we have a middle school with 3 teachers. The kids rotate within the building, to those areas. We're going to add on. So we have currently a kindergarten through fifth grade or fourth grade, and one individual teacher per class, and then we have 3 middle school teachers. Well, right now our middle school is 5th, 6th, and 7th. Next year it'll be 6th, 7th, 8th, meaning that we need to hire a 5th grade teacher. So the 5th grade teacher will go into the main building. The current middle school staff will go and be in the house and the 2-classroom portable.
Okay. Fair enough. Can you address the...
Yes, we do not get any fees for those after-school clubs. We do not charge anyone for those.
Right.
So that's why.
Ask another question.
Sure.
So, I'm a little bit, just as a formal point, assume you're not an attorney, nor is there any formal assignment of legal authority from the owner to you. And so I have, just this as a statement, but you don't have any written authorization from the owner for this application in any way that we could...
I do have our school board chair here that...
I know, but from the owner of the parcel. Who owns the parcel?
The Moscow Charter School does.
The school itself does?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Do you have a executive director or an executive officer of some sort?
I have my board chair.
Oh, okay.
Leslie Baker.
All right. Who acts as the executive officer for the board?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Botticelli?
I do have one question.
Sure.
I actually am rather uncomfortable to authorize a conditional use permit for a school without any cap on the number of students, as you might be able to understand.
We actually we do not exceed 22 kids per class, per grade level.
So that, and you have how many grade levels?
We will next year have 8.
So potentially 176 students total?
Actually, that'd be 9 if we count kindergarten,
sorry,
right?
9.
So now we're at 198 potential students total?
That would be a possibility if each class was full in 7th and 8th, which currently they are not. There's 10 in next year's 7th grade and 5 in next year's 8th grade.
Okay. Thanks.
Just comment, the building code and the fire code would limit the number of occupants per building, so if that's a concern with you, Jerry.
Did you do that right?
Were you asking me that?
No, I was just
okay.
responding to his comment.
People that are modular is being considered going through would be completely up to code and put everything to whatever the city needs.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head, 'cause I don't recall, what the occupant maximum is for those portables?
It was around 30 is what they were saying.
And you limit yourselves to 22?
22 plus staff.
Okay.
Which would be probably no more than 2 or 3 staff members at a time.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, thank
Fair
you
enough.
very much.
Is there anybody else who would like to get up and address any issues in favor of this application?
I would like to hear the board chair provide in the record the authorization for this application, if nothing else. Please, if that's okay, Joe.
That works.
My name is Leslie Baker. I am the chair of the board of directors of Moscow Charter School and president of the corporation for business purposes. So that's at 1723 East F Street.
Okay.
And certainly I authorize this. In fact, I've been working on this since before Tony came on board as our principal. So.
Okay.
I would also like to add, with respect to the question about number of students, that is limited in our charter. So that we are legally required to have no more than 22 students per grade level.
Okay. Evan?
Just to clarify then, so the corporation now owns both parcels?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so whether or not you tie them together with the county isn't that big a deal for us then. So, all right, thanks.
Still is.
Yeah, but less so.
Any other questions for Leslie? Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Anybody else like to get up and say words?
I am Paul Collins. I'm the middle school science teacher there at the charter school, 1723 F Street. And I am a huge proponent of this. Currently, our kindergarten class is out in the kindergarten house, as is our special ed teacher. And there's a lot of back and forth that middle school students would be able to handle just fine, but in the winter, having kindergartners march back and forth. And so the plan, by moving middle school out to there, kindergarten would come into the main building where they would be with the rest of the class. And by having middle school out there with that portable space, we'd be able to give our middle schoolers a sense of independence with a middle school campus type. With that fenced playground area, we would change that to more of a commons area where they would have a certain level of independence, but still be able to do a lot of peer mentoring with the younger grades that are in the main part of the building. So, yeah.
Any questions from the board for Paul?
Actually, I do have one more that probably should have asked earlier, but since you live there every day, you can answer this too.
I'm more than happy to.
So when you have, to the extent that you have parents drop their kids off at the school, that all happens on site in the
Yes.
existing parking lot through that turn?
Yes. So they pull in, drop off in front of the building, and then they circle around and exit through.
Do you have any idea if that was part of the original conditional use permit?
I don't have a clue. This is my first
Okay.
year.
Sorry, don't worry about it. Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
We know.
That was, I think, part of the amendment was to definitely allow for schools to come in and circulate the parking lot, but, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Sure, step right back up. We got a packed house. Plenty of opportunity for anybody to say what they would like.
Use up my time. That question reminded me, I would like to point out that addition of the path that Becky described that goes with this portable building will actually significantly increase safety of students coming to school, because right now there is not a continuous paved separate walking and bicycle path all the way from F Street to the main school building. There's a walkway, but it's not paved continuously, and so many of the students with bicycles share the driveway space with cars, which is not the safest arrangement. And so one of the real benefits of this, in my view, is that the path that will be added in front of the portable unit will be a continuous paved path that we can direct pedestrians and bicycles down. And since I walk my daughter to school every morning, this is important to me, too. So, so that would be a real benefit, I think.
Excuse me. So I
Yeah.
know they just did work on F Street recently. Is there now a sidewalk from Mountain View to the school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that was added.
On your side of the street, on the south side of the street?
Yes,
Correct.
it's on both sides. That was added year before
Yeah, a couple
last,
years
I
ago.
think. It's really been a great improvement, too. So,
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else care to speak? With that, is there anybody out there that would like to speak against the conditional use permit? Seeing none, since you're all gathered together there, I will close the public hearing portion and open this up to discussions with the board.
So I've got a quick question for staff. Becky, were there any conditions placed on the original CUP other than the buffering requirements?
No, there were not.
Okay, great, thank you.
Joe?
Yes.
Again, for Mike and Becky. So this is a potential 33%, more than 33% increase in the number of students at the school. Are there any concerns about increased traffic on F Street? Because that's a fairly significant number of students.
Well, F Street's a designated collector, so it's anticipated that it would, accept the volumes of traffic that you might see associated with two schools, in that area. So curb, gutter, sidewalks on both sides of the street. We have additional street width as well, and so it's basically designed in order to accept, those volumes of traffic.
Would there ever be times when school would be in session while there were activities across the street at the rec center, at the swimming pool? Would that ever happen? I mean, I know that's kind
the
of hard
activities
to
at the
answer.
rec center, yeah, I mean, the HERC across the street is usually after hours, after school, on the weekends type of thing. So I wouldn't anticipate any conflicts there. You also have the additional access off of Mountain View, which is a designated arterial, so that would be able to accept, larger volumes of traffic even than as F Street. So we wouldn't have any concerns with that, no.
Has this been presented through any kind of plan review yet with building officials and fire department and?
We do a preliminary plan review just to make sure everything's going to work. It's a fairly flat site, so we don't anticipate any ADA issues as far as the sidewalk connecting all the building entrances to the public sidewalk. Those are all brand new sidewalks that have been installed on the south side of F Street. Engineering department has recommended that the curb cut be retained in that location just because it's fresh concrete and it's in very good condition, and so it meets all ADA compliance issues. And so usually with the building department, it should be simple. They have modular classrooms, and there's not a whole lot of things you look at there just to make sure that the building entrances are accessible. You have a ramp there. There's the modulars tied down, and other issues like that. And so there has been a plan review. Usually we distribute this to internally as well as externally before we take it to hearing. So
Okay.
it has.
So in terms of fire department, obviously it's off of F Street, so there's street access for fire emergency vehicles, fire hydrant location close enough to service that unit in addition to the others, so that won't.
Yeah, when you pull up a fire truck on F Street, they're able to wrap 150 feet around all sides of the modular, so there's no issue there.
No issue.
The existing access would meet their dimensional standards. There's not a building over 30 feet in height there, so 20 feet in width is the minimum to be able to get a fire truck, and then this turning radius was acceptable to them as well. So.
All right. Evan?
I guess while we're on that, any need for or concerns about buffering to the east? I don't know what's on the lot to the east, but do we need landscape buffers?
It currently is a large vacant lot. I believe we have a requirement that you have a Type A, is that what that is? Type A landscape buffer on the east side. You can see it drawn on their site plan there in that northeast corner. And so that's what will be installed before a certificate of occupancy is issued for the modular.
So that's a code requirement. We don't have to include
Code
that
requirement,
in the,
yep.
Okay.
Right, and that was my question, and that'll be adequate. Since you said it's a vacant lot, I think that
Yep.
partially answered my question. So the Type A, the city feels the Type A is adequate in this case. All right.
But there will be, so the setback on that parcel will be 5 feet, right? The side setback on an R3 parcel would
It's
be...
typically 5 feet. Usually you have to have a combination of 15. If they're, so for instance, the modular classroom has to be set back at least 10 to 12 feet to accommodate for the buffer, and so they wouldn't be able to set that within that 10 to 12-foot area. They would have to set it back at least that much, and they're proposing to set it back 23 feet from that east property line.
I was thinking more of the potential construction on the other side of the
Yeah,
property
it could potentially be 5 feet away from that west property line, depending upon the east setback line.
Mark, any thoughts?
Well, it seems like a good idea, and there's obviously nobody here in the neighborhood that is upset by it. I like the fact that it's tying the campus together with a walkway that gets students out of the parking lot in their access to the main building. I don't see any problems with the project at all, and I will support it.
Jerry?
So, as Mike pointed out, so long as the parcels stay together, we have a conditional use permit for a school, or a conditional use permit for a site to operate a school, not a conditional use permit necessarily for the Moscow Charter School. So the 198 student limitation only applies to the school. It would not apply to any other potential school, which we've already seen has happened, right? We've seen a school transition. So I don't know, Mike, if there's any recommendations as to what sort of max school number of students condition we could or should put on this.
Well, other schools, like Mr. Bonicelli referred to, are limited by the number of students they're allowed in each classroom. I would just possibly, obviously, any other additional buildings, in order to increase classrooms, they would have to come back for an amendment to the CUP. So, I would recommend, staff would recommend going with whatever standard they are held to for each classroom, and then have that be the maximum number of students that can be enrolled.
So, just Becky, so I can point out, the reason I thought there's a 130 student limit is it says that approved a conditional use permit to operate the Moscow Charter School with a combined student enrollment of 130, which made it sound like it was part of the conditional use permit. But I would, so is the board ready to entertain a motion yet, Joe, or anybody else?
Seems like we've just maybe let Evan one more shot here. What do you?
Well, all I wanted to see is kind of get a feel if we wanted to condition either a cap on enrollment. It might be redundant, but it wouldn't hurt. And the other thing is making sure that the parcels are joined. And then that might technically allow us to say now we're approving a parcel and we're approving a school because we're combining them under one.
Well, before I make a motion, I was going to offer the motion to approve with two conditions, being a max count, a max of 198 students, and that CUP only endures as long as the two parcels are jointly operated for a single school. Those would be the two conditions I'd place on it.
But that second condition doesn't require them to actually go to the county and join the two parcels as one, because I don't see a reason to force them to jump through that hoop if they're operating it as a common.
The reason for the condition is just to avoid confusion in the future. If they should ever need to sell that parcel, then it would have to get its own parking and other whatever else the code would require. Because right now we're not requiring that. And if they never intend to sell it, then the condition doesn't make any difference. But it would just prevent against that potential. So I don't know so if they go to the county and get them treated as a single parcel, what is the actual legal effect of that? Like, does it become officially a single parcel in perpetuity?
Well, there's two different things. At the city level, we do, like I mentioned before, a lot tie agreement, which basically, if you're using two parcels and say you're building a single-family home over the top of both of them, effectively using both of those as your building lot, we would enter into a lot tie agreement so that in the future somebody couldn't sell off one of the parcels and then all of a sudden you have nonconformities with setbacks and other issues like that. Up at the county, I would imagine that maybe they would just come in and say that it's one whole parcel. I don't think it really affects them one way or the other. I think they're probably obviously they don't get taxed, and so I don't think it matters one way or the other at the county whether it's one parcel or two parcels.
So from the city's perspective, is it easier to do a condition like I propose, or to have the condition require a lot tie agreement?
Well, if they were to sell off that parcel, I don't think that still wouldn't bring them out of compliance with the with a CUP for the school, because they'd still be under the numbers that maybe you conditioned the CUP on. And at that point in time, we would come in and make sure that the new entity, if they were going to propose a new use on that parcel, was in compliance with all the requirements for off-street parking and all those other issues at that point in time. So,
Well, I guess I'm concerned if the new use wouldn't require any sort of any new CUP or anything, there'd be no option for the city to require what it otherwise could have required.
well, it would, because it would probably be a new use. You know, if it was a use that wasn't associated with the charter school, then
Right, but if
somebody wanted to use that as a single-family dwelling, you know, they would have to come in. We have a change of use certificate permit that we require of people whenever there's a change of use of a structure. And so what we do is we look at compliance at that point in time. You know, is it going to meet all building code requirements for the conversion into a single-family dwelling? Is it going to meet all the off-street parking requirements? You know, any of those other issues. So it would just be a kind of a typical change of use on an existing structure at that point.
Right. But if you're going to do the lot tie agreement anyway, is there any reason not to make it a condition of the CUP? If it's going to happen no matter what, that just makes it simple, and we know going forward that there is the lot. I don't see any reason not to do that.
Well, if they were to sell it, then would that then bring them out of compliance with the conditional use permit? That's what I would be concerned of.
See, that's my concern too. They're using it as one joint thing. I'm trying to, in my mind, think of what may transpire in the future that would, aside from just a complete, reduction of the number of students and the need to have that extra grade, to not need that lot and sell it off. So that would be a plus to keeping them separate. I can't think of a reason to require them to do it, and I can't really think of a good reason not to either. So I'm kind of, I don't know what everybody else thinks.
Well, I think Evan had his hand up first.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that. If it is tied together and they did want to reconfigure their operation there and use that corner, sell it off, use it for something else, then they would have to split it off again. So I can't see any benefit. There's a benefit if you're paying taxes and you tie the lots together, because you're not paying a base on two separate lots. But since they won't be anyway, that won't be a concern with the county. So I can't see an advantage to the school to have them tied together.
That's not what I'm concerned about.
Well,
I'm not concerned about advantaging the school.
Well, Joe, if we're playing what if, maybe at some point they would want to do something more permanent instead of having modular structures there, and maybe they want to add on to the existing facility, and it'd be a funding mechanism for them to sell that property. So I guess I would actually not suggest that we tie the two lots together.
Well, but see, that's precisely the eventuality I'm worried about. So as long as there are two parcels, then there's always the potential that the second one will be sold. And if the assumption
what's
is
the problem with that, though?
There's no problem with it unless, for some reason, whatever happens, that the future landowner is not required to comply with the code at that time. And Mike says that it would be a change in use provision, and then if that satisfies it, if that takes care of the problem, then that takes care of the problem.
Yeah, no use would be able to be established without a change of use certificate issued at the city. And so they would have to come in at that point, and we would have to review everything they have going on. Right now.
And I just want to make sure that at that point you can require that they comply with the entirety of the code. That's all I'm worried about.
We can,
okay.
yeah.
And that's my
and
only
at that
concern.
point, for instance, we have a code requirement that any government, institutional, multifamily use have a public, a sidewalk which connects to the public sidewalk and to all the building entrances. And so, with this project, they've complied with that. In the initial CUP, I don't know that we had that in the code at that time. I think it was around 2005, 2006 where we inserted that, and so they didn't have that connection from the public sidewalk to all those building entrances. If you notice, it goes across that parcel, and so they'd be out of compliance with that at that point. And so there's some things that we'd have to do in order for that to be a change of use on that parcel. They'd have to reroute the sidewalk, and we'd have to make sure that, they were still in compliance. But it's pretty common for that to happen. Things change, and people want to sell off portions, and they may have to reroute some sidewalks, they may have to do some other things, but we would check all the code compliance issues at that point in time when they come in for a change of use.
All right, well, then, you okay now entertaining a motion?
I'm ready to entertain a motion.
Okay, well, I move we approve the application with the condition that the number of students be limited to 198.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Before we vote, I want to clarify, 198 is that equal to 9 times 22?
I believe so, but I've been doing math with myself.
I've been doing math, on my paper, by hand. I just want to make sure that so basically we're giving them a condition that is already part of your charter, so.
I'm not worried about them.
Yeah.
I'm worried about potential different schools.
If I may, once again, we know that these conditional use permits go with the property. They could vacate that, someone else could come in with a different charter.
With a different charter
that says they can have 75 kids per classroom, and then, so this control, I think, is a good idea.
All right.
And it matches what they're doing anyway, so.
So, you start with Marshall?
Well, 22 kids is admirable. I mean, that's really great education, but at some point, if it creeped up to 25 kids, it's still less than what many schools have. And there may be a need for them to creep up to 25 kids, and the classrooms can hold that many without any problem, and they may have an assistant teacher in there where they could easily handle 25 kids. So I guess I'd kind of hate to limit them to just 22. There may be a future need for more than that.
Actually, along those lines, there could potentially be a fluctuation in a particular grade. I've seen it with some of my kids where all of a sudden there's one class that's got 8 and another one that's got 26, where you kind of push that bubble through. But even in that situation, if you're not limiting it to 22 per classroom, but 198 per
For the site.
For the site, then that still allows some flexibility. Even though the 4th grade teacher's busy this year, the 5th grade teacher's going to be busy next year, kind of thing. But it would at least allow for some flexibility.
I should also note that they can always request an amendment to their CUPs should conditions change. And I just would like to be able, we've heard one application, they've characterized their use, and that's what we're approving. If there's a different use that would have more students, I'd like to hear that one too. So I'm going to stick with the 198, but if it fails, I won't oppose whatever comes up.
But if I recall right, you worded it with that it was 198 total, not limiting the 22 per.
It's 198
room,
total
so.
students in the entire operation.
And I guess from the fact that they can come back and amend that number if they felt needed to, I'd be comfortable with that.
All right.
Call it.
Evan?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. So that passes with 5 ayes.
Congratulations.
We're not that easy on everyone.
Jerry, you want to take a...
Oh, you want me to do this?
Figure, might as well start with you. Take a stab at the conditions.
No, okay, so
Voting.
before we do that, can we move to number 5?
Sure.
Joe, you're in charge.
I was actually hoping someone would ask that, because I didn't want to address that first, hold them up, but it would behoove the board to actually be able to discuss how we could potentially deal with our how we come up with our relevant criteria by discussing this new option similar to how planning and zoning does, so that we can, instead of having to craft something on the spot, actually rely more on the record. So do we need a motion to actually shift to agenda item 5 before we complete 4?
I would suggest that, you can just skip to item number 5, and then we'll come back to item number 4 after we've discussed that. Sure.
Okay. Evan?
Do you want to take a 5-minute
You need
break?
5 minute break?
Well, no, I was thinking they might want to move out because.
Oh, well, they can, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that. We'll take like a 5-minute break. Basically, you're more than welcome to stay and listen to how we're going to try to craft your relevant criteria on the fly, or what we're looking at potentially doing is something similar to what planning and zoning does, is the city takes the record, everything that's been discussed, and they craft those not on the spot in front of everybody, and then come back and then we look at it and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, that doesn't, and vote on it then. So we'll take a break. Somebody use the restroom, get a drink, come back. You're welcome to come back. You've been approved. It's just a matter of what the wording of the approval will be. So let's do that. Let's adjourn for 5 minutes. Our break is over, so we will reconvene our meeting. I guess we'll start with the city. Want to explain in general terms how this proposed new system might work, or works already?
I think we may have brought it to your attention maybe a year or so ago. We didn't make any changes at that point, so it's a little bit different the way we do things at Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, the way we write our relevant criteria and standards, and as well as when we craft those. And so typically what happens at Planning and Zoning Commission is they make a motion to approve the item or deny the item or whatever the motion is, and then they'll direct staff to draft the relevant criteria and standards, and then it'll come back at a subsequent meeting for approval along with the minutes. Well, I think that the reason that we haven't done that up to this point with Board of Adjustment is that the meeting schedules are so irregular, and so sometimes we might not get an application. There'd be 4 months, time. So coming back in order to, approve those relevant criteria and standards, we'd basically have to have another meeting in order to do that if we did it like Planning and Zoning Commission. And so, if that's not too onerous to you guys to come back at maybe a later date after we have the criteria and standards drafted, and then maybe it'd be at 5:30. We can have a meeting and just approve the relevant criteria and standards. That's typically what we do in Planning and Zoning Commission. Maybe talk a little bit about the structure, relevant criteria and standards. So typically, in order to have, you generally have relevant facts and conclusions which are incorporated within your relevant criteria and standards, and then you actually have the relevant criteria and standards, which is the actual decision. But the relevant facts and conclusion is basically walking through how you made that decision up to that point. And so I think in order to strengthen our relevant criteria and standards, that would be a way to do it, would be to structure it similar to the way we craft rezones, subdivision plats, things of that nature, in this structure that's, attached to your packet today. So a little bit of an overview.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I think it's a real good idea what they're proposing. I've seen so many boards struggle with the relevant criteria and findings of facts at the end of a meeting, and it was a struggle for them to come up with it. They weren't as accurate. There were things that were left out, the things that should have been put in. And I think this way it's more concise, it's more accurate, and the board still has the chance to come out and amend them. Once they see them on paper at the subsequent meeting, they can amend, as to what they think is relevant to it. And I think it's more accurate, and actually the time is better well spent then, instead of trying to go through a late meeting and do it when you're tired, and this way the staff can take it off the minutes and bring it to us, and I think it's a good system.
Evan?
One thing we've done in the past, and I want to know if you think this is allowable, is that sometimes we did something more this way, because I remember writing them up for the ice rink and some new St. Andrews, and we decided that evening that we would do something like this in these special circumstances and then get together and review it to make sure we had the document. Most of the time we didn't need that, so we weren't doing it one specific way all the time. We were sometimes deciding to have a more verbose, if nothing else, statement of our deliberations, and sometimes not. Now, do you think that's possible, or is that being too willy-nilly?
Jerry, thought?
No and yes to your two questions. I'd be really concerned about an ad hoc process for our decision making, in which we decided whether something was likely to be appealed or not likely to be appealed, with how serious we take it. As I don't have to say that, it wasn't on the record. So as we were talking about earlier, this is the record that is prepared on any appeals. It's the record we create. There's no other opportunity for a record to be created. If a district court were to hear an appeal, it would be based on what we do, not what the city council does. And we've been fairly lax or willy-nilly in how we go about doing this. We have the authority to determine on our own how this process works. The Board of Adjustment has the authority to decide how its operations work. And I don't know that we could come up with an approach that said, legitimately come up with an approach that said, if a lot of people show up and they sit on opposite sides of the room, then we probably should do this. I think we just have to decide we'll do it every time. The other, Mike, the question I was going to have or ask, Bill had mentioned this to me, and I think he talked to Rod about it, but the potential to have, for people to participate by phone, is that allowed? Do you have any idea?
It is allowed, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had some council members that have dialed in,
Okay.
and they are counted towards that quorum.
So that's potentially a way to deal with Evan's concern about the simpler ones that we don't think will be terribly complicated, that we want to get done quickly. We could do a phone meeting and get it done within a few days, whatever your schedule is, rather than having us all come in.
Well, and the last two that were actually appealed, there wasn't a large crowd. It wasn't like it was a big, ice rink thing where, we've got standing room only, but it was still questioned. And I think if nothing else, this helps define what was discussed, why it was discussed, and why the determination came to what it was, so that if something is appealed, there's a set record that it's concise, it's accurate, and to me, that's worth coming back for a short meeting if we don't have anything on the docket. Because my only concern about this would be to have, if we didn't have another meeting for another 2 months, that this particular applicant was waiting to put up their portable for 2 months because we didn't have a meeting. So I have no problem scheduling an extra meeting. And this is a question for city, I know we have to have a quorum in order to approve the minutes. If for some reason, 5 of us were meeting tonight, but 4 of us could meet next Tuesday, say, but they weren't the same 5, does that matter?
No.
So if,
It's just a quorum
of our 7, if...
quorum
if,
of the membership.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's the board acting, it's not the individual members
Okay,
acting.
because, the reason I ask is a lot of times, like tonight, we approved minutes, and we had 2 abstentions because he wasn't on the board yet, and Mark wasn't there. And so I want to make sure that if we come back to approve these relevant criteria after the city has crafted them, and our quorum consists of a different quorum of the 7 of us, that's not an issue.
It's not an issue.
Okay.
Totally unrelated, but can we have the section on the Board of Adjustment added to these two?
Sure.
Defining our
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
The only request I'd have for the city, and you can ignore me if you like, obviously, you do that on occasion, but I hate the whereas structure. That's so antiquated legalese, it drives me crazy. That section could just be characterized as background and then simple declaratory statements.
Sorry, what structure?
The whereas the applicant filed an application at the top. I know the city council does it, but
The word
whereas, just take that word out, capitalize the next one.
So you're just saying to remove the whereas,
Yeah.
but it sounds so good.
Drives me crazy.
Only if you're a lawyer and not an English
Explains
teacher.
a lot.
Doesn't take much to drive me crazy.
It's
You
a
guys
short
figured
draw.
it out.
It sounds like we're all in favor of doing this. Does this require,
Yeah, it does.
I'd make a motion, yeah.
there we go.
So I move that the board going forward, in crafting the relevant criteria and standards, direct staff to prepare a reasoned statement of relevant criteria and standards containing sections on relevant fact and conclusions, stating our factual conclusions, and the relevant criteria and standards, which are our legal conclusions, followed by a decision to be approved at a later meeting. Is that, you know what I'm talking about, but that works?
Yep.
Okay.
That sounded extremely concise to me.
Thanks.
Accurate. That was well defined. Do I have a second?
Hold on, I'm not done yet.
Oh.
Without the word whereas. No. Sorry. You can, I'll take that back.
Do we have a second?
Well, I second it. The whereas
The
doesn't
whereas
matter.
doesn't matter? All right, but we have a motion, we have a second.
No, you're supposed to say, whereas we have a motion, and whereas we have a
motion.
second.
Therefore, it is time to see if everybody would like to vote.
How about since?
Evan?
Aye.
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 Aye. So there's 5 ayes, 0 nays. That new motion passes. And so now, as I understand it, that just deferred finishing item 4 until city crafts our relevant facts and conclusions and relevant criteria for us to...
Yeah, you have to direct staff in order to craft those, and then we'll also need a motion to do that as well.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
I do, but I have a comment first. The motion actually didn't include a time frame, and I just now realize that. We're going to direct you to craft this. Would you like us to give you a deadline?
We'll craft it as soon as possible, and then we'll let you know, and then we can meet. We have 48-hour notice requirement, and so depending upon how long it takes to craft, anywhere between 1 or 2 days, then we'll send out an email, and then we can all decide on a date within the next, 3-4 days.
Okay,
Does that work?
so prior to this, 48 hours was typically what you had in mind. Anyway, that's what
Usually it takes
typically
us
done
a
in the
day or
past.
two to craft them, and then we have a legal requirement that we can't hold a meeting. We have to post notice of the meeting 48 hours in advance of the meeting, and so
Okay.
we're bound by that.
Okay.
Joe?
Evan?
So if you come across something in there that still isn't clear, listening to the recording and all of that, is it possible then for who's ever crafting this document to email us to poll the board members to get our feeling on where we were going with that before you write something up and then we have a meeting, we say, no, that's not what we meant? Can you
Well,
do
you
that?
can change it at that meeting, so, would that work for you? We craft it up, and then,
It's what works for you is if you're hitting a difficulty and coming up with a clear either fact or a clear statement for one of the criteria, is it possible that you could pull the whole board there and say, now, just exactly where you were going there?
The only problem with that is then all of a sudden our email clarifications become part of an extended public hearing,
That's
which
why I was
is
wondering if
no
that's
longer
possible.
public.
Well, that's not a
That's not public.
That's not a
anyway.
public hearing.
It's not public.
I don't.
Because that portion of it has been closed, so it's just more of our
I'm not a
deliberation.
lawyer. I don't think there's an issue with any of that. When usually we post the agenda, we have the draft relevant criteria and standards anyway, so you'll have it at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting in order to review it and bring your thoughts and make those corrections.
Well, this is what we did on the last one, remember? Becky, you sent it to us early, and we all provided edits, and Bill said that was cool.
Okay.
Because it's no different than staff doing it. We're just assisting staff in the drafting of the relevant criteria that we will then consider as part of a formal meeting. So I don't see how it's any different.
Sure. Yeah,
I think Evan's point's good, that if there's something you don't remember or that we weren't clear about, we can fight about it again. But the only potential concern is that it is public record if you didn't want it our deliberations to be, but they are anyway, so I don't know why that's a problem.
We'll consult with our city attorney, and I'll let you know if that's an issue, but we'll just go with that for the time being. How about that?
So, if I understand, you want us to vote on a motion to direct you to draft relevant criteria and standards based on our conversations today, something along those lines?
Correct.
Does staff have any questions concerning any of the factual conclusions or other conclusions we reach before we do that, or are we good to go?
I think we're fine.
Joe, you ready now?
It is. So as I understand it, then basically the motion to direct staff to do that would have been the same as the motion we would have created to approve what we tried to come up with.
So let me try and see what you think.
Okay.
So the last motion was to change our procedures.
Yep.
Okay, going forward. So this one would be, I move that we direct staff to prepare relevant criteria and standards based on our conversations tonight and based on the draft that was presented to us in the packet. Is that okay with everybody? I had no objections to what was included in the draft in the packet. but based on that as modified by the meeting today.
That was a motion?
Yeah.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion. We have a second. Evan, we'll start down with you.
Aye.
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 Aye. So we have 5 ayes, 0 nays. We have now directed you to do our work for us. All right. Thank you.
That's all we needed, right?
Yeah.
All right.
And
With
just,
that-
just to be clear, we'll have to do that every time
Yeah.
we want to.
Right,
do
that would be the second round of motions that we make.
Yep.
The first motion we just did, though, we don't have to do that.
Right, yeah, that's, this is item 6. Is there any other board communications or any other upcoming meetings? I know we have one here in a couple weeks.
Yep, just the April 22nd hearing for a conditional use permit.
Okay. Anything beyond that?
That's a Tuesday, right?
Yes.
A couple of applications that are being spoken of, but nothing currently in our hands.
Okay. So then we can expect email correspondence about coming back to review the criteria probably the beginning of next week.
We'll probably send us some out tomorrow.
Okay.
Let you look at it over the weekend, and then it'll be crafted similar to what we have in the staff report, and we'll see what you say. But yeah, should be getting it out tomorrow.
Okay. So, Joe and Mike, would it be okay, Joe, to ask staff to communicate with the applicant and see if 12 days is too long to wait for formal approval, since we'll be back in 12 days? And if it is too long, then we meet before that, but if it's not, then there's no need to have a
second
And I won't be here next week, so.
Is that okay?
Sure, we
Communicate
can
with-
communicate with
all right.
the applicant. Yep.
Okay.
Is this 18th century?
Can we communicate with the applicant now? That feels so informal, I'm sorry.
Is
Are you-
12 days too long? No? All right.
I think how long is the building permit process?
Usually we shoot for 2 weeks, but oftentimes it gets done a lot sooner than that. So, it'll be pretty simple plan review for a modular classroom.
Are you trying to
so-
get your modular up and running this school season?
No.
Oh, well, then you've got lots of time.
But they could submit,
Anyways, right?
they could submit their application, though.
You can submit your
Couldn't process it.
application, you just, you can do some preliminary things, but typically, once the relevant criterion standards are approved and signed is when the appeal period starts on one of these. So you also have a 10-day appeal period beyond that. And so if you're comfortable with that, we can do it that way, or if you're not, we can certainly converse via email and then come back in 3 or 4 days and approve.
I think we're fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So that would be, if I remember right, this is 22nd?
Correct.
Will the chair entertain a motion to adjourn?
I'm looking for, that's the last motion I'm
moved.
looking for.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We are adjourned for the evening. Thank you.